Okay, cool. So the title of this talk is DuPont's Dirty Dozen. You're quite right, it comes from aircraft engineering. And the aim of this talk is to introduce you to DuPont's Dirty Dozen, which is and it follows on very well from the previous talks, which is a method of recognising the major causes of human error. And then what I'm going to do is apply those major causes of human error to skydiving, which I think is what makes it really relevant. And the reason why I want to do that is because I'm passionate about human error, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I firmly believe that by training people to recognise the major causes of human error, I think that's going to go a long way to actually preventing a lot of incidents in our sport. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm a full-time tandem instructor and camera guy at Chatteris. Before I went full-time, I was a weekender, so I've worked at a couple of different centres as well as Chatteris. Critical figures: how many jumps have I got? I've got about 3,000 tandems, about 3,000 tandem videos, 6,500 tandems in total. Last November, I was made an advanced instructor, and Jeff would only give me the rating if I agreed to give this talk. So. It's a little bit about me. But really the background to the talk, why I got interested in human error was this incident here. Many of you are probably familiar with this particular incident. But this happened at Chatteris. This happened at Chatteris, a drop zone. Now I've jumped at lots of different drop zones, and anybody who's worked at Chatteris, anybody who's jumped at Chatteris knows they've got a pretty robust attitude to safety. Can anybody see, by the way, what the error my colleague made in this picture? Chest strap, quite right. The chest strap was off. And he jumped with the chest strap in that configuration, as we've seen from earlier slides. And it really got me thinking, how could this happen at somewhere like Chatteris, someone with such a robust attitude to safety? And I think it's also fair to say, I'm not saying this because he's in the room, but it was a mystery to the chief instructor as well. How, after all these all these safety measures that he'd implemented, could something like this happen? So we got we got an aviation expert in to talk to us about human factors. And one of the human factors, or one of the topics of the human factors that we discussed was DuPont's Dirty Dozen. Just to give you a quick background, if some of you have heard of it, some of you haven't, into DuPont's Dirty Dozen. But the concept of the Dirty Dozen was developed by Gordon DuPont in 1993. When he was working for Transport Canada, in particular looking at the major causes of incidents in aviation maintenance. It has subsequently been used as a cornerstone in aviation maintenance training all over the world, including in the UK. Now, it's not extensive. ICAO lists over 300 precursors to human error, but it is a useful point for organisations like ours to start a discussion into the main causes of human error. In researching this talk, I've seen this adapted to work, obviously, in aviation maintenance, in flight crews. I've heard it when I was learning to fly. I've seen it used in emergency services, and I've even seen it used in medicine. That picture in the middle with the red circle is a haematology conference. So it's something we can apply to a lot of things, and I thought it'd be an interesting exercise to apply it to skydiving. The basis of the Dirty Dozen is the fact that we're all human, and therefore we're all capable of making mistakes. And in fact, if we look at all incidents in skydiving, the vast majority of them, I think you said it, Rich, the vast majority of incidents in skydiving are caused by human error, aren't they, really? I mean, if you think about problems that we have on exit, on landing, okay, we could levy a lot of those at the student or the instructor. Problems in aircraft, that's driven by human. Maintenance errors or problems with equipment, they're designed and maintained by humans. So I would argue that nearly all errors in skydiving could be attributed to human error. And therefore they're preventable. Therefore we can do something to prevent those incidents from occurring. And I believe that by training people to recognise the major causes, major precursors of human error, we can greatly reduce the number of errors that are caused. So this is DuPont's Dirty Dozen. So you should all have a handout here in your hand. And while we're going through this, I'm going to talk about some errors. I'm going to talk about some countermeasures. Feel free to write down some that are relevant to you that maybe I've missed as we go along. But But no talk about the Dirty Dozen is complete without looking at the countermeasures as well, the procedures that we can put in place to counter those errors. Now, a countermeasure is a recommendation, a regulation, a policy, a practice or procedure which put in place and observed can remove a link in the error chain. You know, take a section off the pyramid of disaster, unline the hole in the Swiss cheese of error, whichever analogy you want to draw. Now, SDC or British Skydiving will control the recommendations, the regulations and the policy. Your PTO, your CI, your team leader will control perhaps what procedures you put in place, but you control the practices. And I think it's quite telling that all the regulations that SDC put in place are usually a direct result of an incident that's occurred in response to a human error that's occurred. But it's beholden on us, and I think it's really our responsibility as tandem instructors to look at the practices. What can we do to prevent these errors from occurring so we don't have to put a regulation in place? And when we were called the BPA, what did the BPA used to stand for? Ban parachuting altogether. That's what everybody used to say because of all of our regulations, but they were all written in blood, to use that old-fashioned term. And if we as instructors can do our best to make sure that errors don't occur, then we don't need to put so many rules in place, so many regulations. And I'm passionate about that. I think if we look after ourselves, we don't need to be looked after. So let's look at the first of DuPont's Dirty Dozen, the failure, lack of communication, which can be defined as a failure to exchange information. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. So understand what you're talking about, understand what's being said, and then make your point clear, which is a matching of mental pictures. Now, general countermeasures to this would be to have discussions, to work as a team, and to never assume. But let's look at a case study in skydiving to maybe emphasise this point. Now, this is a picture of, well, it's not the particular canopy in place, but it reminds me of an incident that happened at a PTO I used to work at on the weekends. And it's a picture of the canopy that nobody wanted to jump. Now, we've all got them, haven't we? Everybody's shaking their heads. We've got that one canopy that's always at the back of the kit store that nobody wants to jump. And the reason for this particular canopy, it didn't fly particularly well. It didn't land particularly well, so people used to leave it in the back of the hangar and only jumped it if they really, really needed to. Now, I went back to this PTO after a couple of weeks working somewhere else, and one of the packers said to me, "Oh, Kev, rig number 6. It's got a brand new canopy in it." I went, "Oh, brilliant! So they've changed the canopy." And I was having a beer with the DZ owner that evening, and I said, "Oh, you changed number 6. That's brilliant. That canopy's been for ages. You know, why did you change it?" And he said, "Nobody told me. That canopy was absolutely knackered." I only found out because I was doing my end of year stats, and I noticed that all the other rigs had done X number of jumps, and this one was miles behind it. And when I spoke to the packers, they said, "Oh, nobody wants to jump that because that canopy's knackered." So it's our responsibility to communicate as instructors issues like this, and I think that's a good evidence of that. But there's other evidence of lack of communication in skydiving. Off landings, for instance, are a failure for us to understand or maybe communicate the upper winds or run-in, the exit separation, errors with exit separation, maybe opening too close to each other, wing loading on tandems, perhaps we're catching other people up. And the countermeasures could be to show the run-in on the flight line and actually look at it. Have means of communicating change. At Chatteris, on the what we do now is on run-in, the pilot will actually shout back how fast what our ground speed is across the ground, so we can work out from there what the correct exit separation will be, so that we have adequate exit separation. If you're having problems with catching other tandems out, work as a team, and if there's 8 of you on the lift, then look at the different loadings. If this person is a heavy instructor jumping with a heavy student, and this person is a light instructor with a light student, work as a team to make sure that the heavy person gets out first. If it's difficult for you to do it, maybe just the person sat next to you. We'll quite often do that. Me and Tim at the back there. I'm quite a big bloke. If I've got a big student, I'll say to Tim, "I'll tell you what, Tim, I'll go first," or Tim will say to me, you go first. So communication is the key, and never assuming is essential to making sure that lack of communication never shows up in the error chain. The second of DuPont's causes of error is complacency, which is a self-satisfaction resulting in a loss of awareness of the dangers. Now, this is more prevalent with the greater or the more competent you are, and I think we've had some really excellent examples of that occurring in other situations. And this is where you become so competent that you begin to see and hear what you expect to see and hear. Now, general kind of countermeasures to this would include using checklists, always expecting to have a problem, don't sign for something you haven't done or a check you haven't done, for instance, learning from the mistakes of others, reading SDC reports and always assessing the risk. Now, a really good case study for this was the talk that Henk gave a couple of years ago. How many people here saw the talk that Henk gave? If you didn't, I really recommend going on to the YouTube channel that we have and downloading it. Henk talks about it much more effectively than I ever can. And for those of you that haven't seen it, Henk talks about an uninflated drogue that he had where he did the wrong emergency drill. So let's have a look at that now. So we've got an uninflated drogue in tow. So what's the drill for this? Wait 6 to 8 seconds. Pull primary, pull secondary. We definitely don't deploy the...
Yeah, that's a good one.
So we definitely don't deploy the reserve. So Henk did that drill and faced that situation and got it wrong. For those of you that don't know Henk's experience, this is Henk's experience up here. So it backs up the assertion that complacency is more likely to occur with the greater competency that you have. So I think it's a really good illustration of that. But there's other instances where complacency happens, particularly amongst those people who are really, really experienced. Now, maybe it may sound like I'm teaching you to suck eggs, and I'm really not. But these are all examples I've thought of where I've applied that to me. I've applied it to my colleagues. Where let's be honest about this. I would like to pay tribute to Henk, and I'd like to see a lot more people doing this. Where this is a guy with how many jumps you got, Henk? 24,000, 25,000, 16,000 tandems. He did something wrong, but he had the balls to stand up in front of a group of his peers and actually say, I messed up. I've got all this experience and I did that wrong. And I would love, if we had it, Mike's point was a valid one about the just culture. We should promote a culture where we can all stand up and say, look, I made a mistake here. Let's all learn from this. Let's all learn from this error. And I think the way Henk's been treated and a lot of the incidents have gone recently, we are approaching that. I think that's fair to say, Jeff, that we are approaching a just culture. So Mark just stood up and gave us, Mark Procost did a really great talk on what we should be looking for in pre-flight checks. No one is too experienced to think, I know all there is to know about pre-flight checks. I know all there is to know about checking people on the flight line. I know everything about closing loops, doing my drills and handle checks. But these are all errors that really experienced instructors are making. And these are some of the countermeasures that you can put in place. Have a routine or system. I have 3,000 tandems. It's not a lot, or it's more than some, less than others. But I still do the same thing at each point. I still tell the same joke at the same height, and I still check the person at the same point. As I walk towards the aircraft, I'll do a handle check then. I'll do several handle checks in freefall. I'll check the student in the same way at the same point on the way up to altitude. And if you have the routine in place, then you're never going to miss that out. I mean, the danger is if you're talking to someone who's particularly interested, then you may go past that routine. But always have a routine or a system in place and stick to it, whether you've got one tandem or 10,000 tandems. Flight line checking. Mark made the very good point. You should always expect to find a problem on flight line checking and don't just pay lip service to the check. Just one more jump is not acceptable on a closing loop. It costs pennies to replace and it takes seconds. So never accept that you just do one more jump on a closing loop. Use the appropriate drills and make sure those drills are up to date. And when I was talking to Henk and I said, look, mate, do you mind if I use you as an example? One thing that Henk really made about doing our drills is I've seen at various different centres a massive difference in the attitude they have towards drills. Some treat them quite lackadaisically. Others attach a lot of importance to drills. We should all be attaching great importance to drills, because one of the things that Henk said about the incident he had there is nothing that prepares you for an incident like the incident actually occurring to you. So a drill will never adequately prepare you for the actual incident when it happens. So you need to be doing those drills rigorously, and you need to be doing those drills under pressure. I think that's fair, isn't it, Henk? And you also need to make sure you're doing the up-to-date drills, because as we've all seen, those drills are changing. So you need to keep in up-to-date with the drills, and as they had all the updates to the drills. And always adopt best practice. I'm going to talk about handles checks and perhaps not doing handle checks in freefall and the epidemic that occurred certainly a couple of years ago, but you should always adopt best practices with your attitudes towards things that perhaps you don't think are all that important. So the third of DuPont's precursors to error was a lack of knowledge, a lack of training or experience for the task at hand. And this occurs predominantly in professions with constantly advancing technological changes. Sounds a lot like skydiving, doesn't it, really? Now, on average, I mean, it's based on the fact that on average, a human only retains 20% of what they learn, unless they use that regularly. What does that sound like? Malfunctions, tandem malfunctions. So countermeasures to this would be to never guess, know. And this is one thing that Tom Noonan really emphasises in his talks when he comes to these sessions is, do you know your drills? Are you prepared to put your rating on that? Are you prepared to put your life on it? Because that's what it means, and we've seen loads of examples of that recently. To get CPD, continuous professional development, to always follow correct procedures. If you don't know something, be man or woman enough to actually ask and find out. Just because you're a tandem instructor, you're not going to look stupid by asking a colleague for advice about something that you don't know, and always seek training where you possibly can. Now, I think the biggest example of where lack of knowledge was one of the precursors to a fatality was the low dive fatality. So how many people here are familiar with the low dive fatality that occurred? It's my understanding that the person that trained this instructor perhaps wasn't as rigorous as they could be, and in fact, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong about this, that everybody that person had trained had to be retrained, and there was question marks over whether this guy.
And actually, there was a later fatality with somebody he trained as well.
Oh, really? So yeah. Two fatalities where perhaps the people. So again, I mean, frighteningly similar to Henk's incident where we've got a drogue in tow. I don't know if anybody's been timing it, but it's certainly considerably longer than 6 to 8 seconds. I'm not even confident this guy knows that he had a drogue in tow, but this time it perhaps didn't work out quite as well as Henk's did, and it was a fatality. So an extreme example. So here we go. So lack of knowledge in skydiving, not knowing, deliberately in capitals, knowing your drills. Do we really know our drills as effectively as we possibly can? Mark's just given us a great mini talk on how to fit a tandem harness correctly. This is one of the things, certainly again with complacency, as we become more competent, it is human nature to always find a shortcut to do things quicker. And I think fitting a tandem harness is one place where we're in real danger of doing this. Not knowing the relevant manuals, we were talking about how do we fold the drogue correctly. It's in the manual. Again, it's human nature to find shortcuts, and again, folding the drogue is a place where we perhaps always find a shortcut, repeating the mistakes of the past, and not being aware of technical issues and safety bulletin. So we can put in place quite rigorous or obvious countermeasures to this. This is obvious, but let's look at it. We can run through drills properly and rigorously to make sure that we're on point. We can get advice and conduct research. We can read the flipping manuals. We can read STC minutes. We can make sure we're familiar with STC notices, and we can always take CPD where offered. Now, a quick point on CPD on the back of your little handout here. So you've got on the front, you've got the dirty dozen, which you can note. You've got on the back something which I picked up from a management conference. CPD only works if you take something away from it. So there might be something in this session or throughout the whole day that you pick up. And one thing, I've been to lots of conferences, management type conferences, where you think, actually, you know what? In fact, I heard one of the guys over there saying, do you know what? One thing I'm going to take home, I'm going to take this home, and I'm going to put this in place. So there's a little thing on the back of that sheet there. Use it if you will. But it's a really good place, to actually, if you write something down, you're more likely to take it home and make it time critical say I'm going to do it by when the DZ opens, or I'm going to do it by next week. And I find this a really useful thing with CPD to actually implement some of the things that perhaps you've learned through the sessions. So number 4 on DuPont's dirty dozen list is distraction, and that's anything that takes our mind from the task at hand just for a moment. And it works on the principle, of course, that our minds work quicker than our hands. And this is probably responsible for up to 15% of all incidents. Now, countermeasures to this might be to always finish the job before dealing with distractions. Use a checklist, peer check, go back to the start, or 3 steps if interrupted. And a really great case study for this was in 2018. This went to STC. By the way, if I'm using case studies here and there's people in the room and it's you, again, it's not personal. I'm not trying to criticise you. Let's look at the incident and not the individual that's involved. There was an incident where in the pattern, a Tandem student was feeling unwell. So the instructor did his best to give that student a sick bag, but unfortunately he was so low in the pattern that he realised as he was coming in on final approach to land that he had neglected, because he was too busy dealing with the student being unwell, he neglected to pick up the secondaries. So he went back to pick up the secondaries, but unfortunately he'd already hit the ground before he picked up the secondaries, and it broke 2 of the student's vertebrae. I'm not getting any of that incorrect, am I, Jeff? Just a fact check there. So he's distracted by the incident. So we always have to guard against distraction. From my own personal experience, I pick up the secondaries at 1,000 feet, and if the student, after that point, if the student's feeling ill, I'm going to take it, because below 1,000 feet, you need to be concentrating on the pattern, where all the other guys are in the pattern, and obviously flaring on landing as well. So that's a countermeasure I have personally put in place to avoid that particular type of thing. The other thing, the distraction, I believe, is a major cause of are these incidents here, and we've seen, unfortunately, in the past, a couple of incidents where the top hooks have been found to be undone, either in the aircraft or later on in a case of an incident in America. Now, this is in America, so it's not BPA, so I don't have to be worried about it. But I've actually seen this happen. I've been sat on a caravan where we've been hooking up. The Tandem instructor was about to put the hooks on. And what normally happens when you're sat in a caravan, particularly with bench seats, one in the middle, so we have to get someone in the middle. We mess around getting someone in the middle. They sit down, everything's right. Aircraft taxis off, and the instructor hadn't done the top hooks up. But luckily I'd noticed this, tapped the instructor on the shoulder. So distraction is a major cause of incidents, and we must always guard against being distracted. So what are some of the countermeasures we can put in place to avoid distractions? So obviously we've got our checks, we've got our in-aircraft checks, but be systematic. The core skills that every instructor should have is to have a system, have a routine, and always stick to it. So where might we be distracted? Flight line checking. So what do we do if we're distracted on the flight line? We go back, we start again. We learned that from when we were doing our B license stuff. But let's not forget it. Let's take it forward as instructors. If your student has an issue and demands your attention, then you should always have a system to come back to, and a system in place that if you're at a critical phase of the skydive or the landing, that you unfortunately have to just take whatever's happening and deal with it later on when you're perhaps in not such an urgent circumstance as well. And take your time to avoid being distracted. So number 5 on DuPont's dirty dozen list is a lack of teamwork, and that's a failure to seek the input of others. The larger organisation happens, the more likely this is to occur. And it's absolutely vital for safety management systems, for the SMS system to succeed, if we're all part of the same team and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And it calls for trust, it calls for a common goal, and it calls for communication. So in order for teamwork to occur, you have to be approachable, but you also have to be strong enough to venture your own opinion. Discuss what, who, and how. Everybody must be on message, and it doesn't matter who is right. All that matters is what's right. Classic example, and a particular bugbear of mine, a lack of teamwork in skydiving, I think, is the poor exit count. And we've already talked about a Tandem instructor and a cameraman working quite closely together. But I also think that one of the case studies that we had this morning, where the 2 canopies landing on top of each other, I think this is also a classic example of a lack of teamwork in action. Firstly, you should never be at 1,000 feet and on the same level as another tandem instructor. You should always work as a team. Firstly, as I mentioned, you can work that out in the aircraft. If someone's going to catch you up, it's usually pretty obvious in the aircraft. So put them out first. Put them out before you. Secondly, use communication when you're in the air. Again, this is another great talk that Tom Noonan did a couple of years ago regarding when you're in the pattern and someone's on level with you, way above 1,000 feet. If you want to go faster than someone, if you want to go slower than that other person, put your arms out. Signal to that person that you'd like to go past them. And secondly, working with your camera guys to ensure that they don't stand together. As a camera guy, the first thing you do when you land is you go and chat to the other camera guy about how awesome your swoop was and how awesome you were in freefall. So it's cameraman's nature to stand together, but you don't have to land next to your camera. I mean, it makes great video, but you can still land a little bit further away, and your cameraman's got legs. He can walk over to you to film your landing as well. So I think this is a major precursor in that particular area, is to work as a team. So again, examples of how we as tandem instructors sometimes don't work as a team, landing together, poor exit count for the camera fly, and that's in the air. But I also don't disregard that working as a team also starts on the ground as well. You might be that one person in your team, you might have that one person who does absolutely everything, or feels they're doing absolutely everything when they're on the ground. That might be, for example, doing all the briefs, assessing all the students. And that person, if they feel they're doing absolutely everything when they're on the ground, is going to be stressed, and we're going to talk about stress a little bit later on. The thorny issue of whether you should pack or whether you shouldn't pack, and this is different in different centres, but sometimes if you don't pack, then you put pressure on the other instructors or the other packers, or equally, if you have packers and you're packing, you're taking away work from other packers, and that causes ill feeling, it causes stress, and that ultimately leads to incidents as well. And sometimes we as a team, we have petty disagreements. And again, that leads to ill feeling, it leads to stress, and that's likely to be a precursor to incidents as well. So we can work out, we can put these countermeasures in place. You can delegate to make sure that one person isn't doing absolutely everything. You can work together to ensure that problems are resolved. Let's face it, nothing's that important that we need to take a petty argument into the air. You can be the 0 or +1 in your organisation. What does that mean? Well, I watched this brilliant TED talk, and it said in organisations we have -1s, we have 0s, and we have +1s. -1s are the guys that need constant, or girls are the team members who need constant supervision, and therefore they involve the work of someone else, and we need someone else to help them do their jobs, so they're -1s. People that just do their jobs are 0s, they're great people, and +1s are the people that are doing the work of other people at the same time as well. So you should always seek to be a 0, always seek to be a +1, and not kind of take work away from other people, or not be so lazy that other people have to do your work for you. So number 6 on the dirty dozen is fatigue, a loss of awareness caused by tiredness. And this is a major cause of human error. It's insidious, it's often realised too late, and it rarely works alone. It can be found in conjunction with lots of the other factors as well. It's something that organisations tend to overestimate, and yet individuals tend to underestimate. You've got to be aware of the symptoms, so countermeasures to this would be to look at the symptoms in others. Sleep and exercise well, eat well, and self-check. Look out for others as you're checking people out. Now, a great case study for this was actually a guy on my tandem course in 2010. This guy was a new tandem instructor, and he'd been sent back on the course because he had less than 40 tandems. He'd just come off the back of a 10-jump day. On his last jump of the day, he didn't put the drogue out. This isn't him, this is just another video I found. So he didn't put the drogue out, pulled primary, nothing happened, pulled secondary, nothing happened, and ultimately he had to deploy his reserve because he was fatigued. He'd done too much too soon. Now we've got policies in place now, we've got regulations in place through the Tandem working group that we've all found out today to stop this from happening, but really we should look after our new instructors. We should make sure that we should have been making sure that they're not doing too much too soon anyway. Met roulette is another famous one. I don't know about you, but I discovered years ago that I could know, I'm 44 now, I discovered when I was 30 that I couldn't pop it up the night before and then still be effective the next day and jump. So, there's a time for work and there's a time for play. As a professional instructor, should you really be playing Met Roulette? And my argument to that is definitely not. Not hydrating or eating enough, why not bring a packed lunch? Now, who in here knows Gary Small? Gary Small is famous for the size of his lunchbox that he, and I don't mean in a Linford Christie kind of way, but quite often at drop zones, if you're working hard, you go to the canteen to get something to eat. There's a massive, great big line of Tandem students in the queue. They're not going to give you, they don't give you priority, so you have to go without food, without water for that day because the queue in the canteen is too long. An obvious way to get around that is bring a packed lunch, take a drink in with you. You might be knackered. You might not have got enough sleep the night before, and a solution to that is obviously get enough sleep, or perhaps another partner. The old adage, too much bed, not enough sleep. Again, is a drop zone thing. You might not be strong enough or fear that you're lacking something in the flare. In that case, get down the gym, do more work, or that's often a technique thing. Work with other instructors to look at the techniques you can employ to finish that flare. Number 7 on DuPont's list is a lack of resources, a lack of material support in order to carry out the task safely. This is common in tough times, and resources are often safety nets and prevent incidents. And general countermeasures to this would be to always stock take and make sure you have critical parts available, anticipate future needs, and learn when to speak up. Now, this was most clearly evidenced in a tandem fatality that they had in Poland in 2017 on an advanced tandem kit. And you can obviously see the outcome here. The report is available. It's in Polish, but it's translated online. And what they've done in this particular incident is instead of the flex pin that was recommended, is when they changed the drogue, and the report isn't clear on how this happened, they'd actually used an inferior flex pin. And when it came time to release the drogue, the Teflon on the flex pin departed, and it came out of the of this bit here, and it caused a bag locking. Sorry, the swaging. Sorry, that was the word I was looking for. Thank you. And it caused a bag lock malfunction. Obviously, you can probably tell it was a double fatality there. So common errors in skydiving again might be not to have enough staff. Your kit, you might have some kit that's in a poor state of repair. You might have canopies that need relining. You might have parts missing, or you might buy cheaper parts because you can get more of them. And obvious countermeasures to here would be to network. I'm in charge of the camera team at Chatteris, so I have a long list of people that I can call should I need them. Never accept kit that's in a poor state of repair. No rig, according to Noel has a great mantra, no rig deserves to be in the air. So speak up, ground it. If it looks wrong, it doesn't have to be in the air. You have the confidence to say, no, I'm not jumping that. Research the cost of relines, for example. It's not as expensive as you think, and always have a critical stock of parts, drogues, and such like. Number 8 on DuPont's list is pressure, the urgency of matters requiring immediate attention. And I think this is ever present in skydiving where time is money, and particularly if you work for Can, he's always on your back. Often self-inflicted, so pressure is often from inside. And it's critical to identify and recognise when you're putting yourself under pressure and learn how to deal with that pressure. Be sure that pressure isn't self-induced. If you do have concern about it, communicate your concerns, always ask for help. And learn when to say no, I'm not going, or just give me a lift off. I just need a bit of time out. Fantastic case study again in 2018 was an incident where an AED was found not to be in the aircraft, and the tandem instructor came back down. In the research for why this particular incident happened, the instructor had done one tandem jump, then he'd done an AFF jump back to back. And then he was doing another tandem jump, back to back. Didn't realise he was on the third tandem jump, rushed into the kit store, got a rig out, turned the AED on, didn't check to see the AED go through the whole of its sequence because he was too busy watching the student land, and there was a problem with the student. So he was under pressure. He was doing lots of jumps back to back, had other things on his mind, so was under pressure, and ended up with, this is me, by the way, checking out Glenn. I wasn't the instructor involved. Another one was the, I'm perhaps giving the game away there with the fatality. We'll take the name out, but the second fatality that Richard spoke about there was a great example of someone under pressure. I mean, okay, you asked a very good question about was there pressure from the DZ for that guy in that second fatality to jump, but I think we've all been in that situation where perhaps we've been sat on the aeroplane and we've had something happen with our kit. And is it pressure from the DZ for that guy to actually jump, or is it our own pressure that we're putting on ourselves? You know, I can deal with this. We've got to go. We've got to run to get to the aircraft. I must jump. Take your time. Learn when to say no. Learn when to say, no, hang on a second, I've got a problem. Let's go round. And that guy, I think we all were saying it. Learn when to say, no, I'm coming down. Now, I shouldn't jump with this particular problem, and recognise the pressure. And don't be afraid to miss the lift. Let someone else jump, or it's not a problem if one tandem doesn't jump. Number 9 on DuPont's list is a lack of assertiveness, and that's failing to speak up when things don't seem right. Assertiveness also calls for you to be approachable, because if you're not approachable, then someone has to be particularly assertive if they see a problem that they want to report to you, or have a problem that perhaps with something that you're doing. And it's the middle ground between passive and aggressive. And if you don't feel that you can speak up, it's often a symptom that you have a poor culture in your organisation. Learn to stand up for yourself and understand that you have a responsibility to stand up for yourself and to point things out. If you don't feel that you can approach someone, maybe find someone, a common go-between, and promote a positive and just culture within the organisation that you work for, and the organisation obviously that we represent. Now, the triple fatality in Australia, I think, is a really good example of a lack of assertiveness. And you might be sat there thinking, why is that a really good example of a lack of assertiveness? Well, actually, I'm going to levy this at myself, because this fatality happened a year after this fatality happened. This was me. I'm the instructor in question here, and this is a camera guy flying underneath me. And I think that one of the possible factors leading up to this particular fatality was the fact that a guy was backflying underneath the tandem. Now, in my particular instance, this camera guy started flying underneath all of us as instructors, about a year after this fatality occurred. And when it started happening, we all know, how many people in here are camera flyers? We as camera flyers know that you shouldn't be backflying under tandems. It's maybe a contentious point. I see a few of you smiling. Obviously, some of us have maybe done it. I might be jealous because I can't backfly to such a degree to make this effective. But when this guy started doing it, I thought, this is wrong. This isn't right. And I felt really uncomfortable about it, but I said nothing. And I did absolutely nothing about it. I worked with 8 other instructors. They all were happy with it. So I thought, it must just be me. I'm just jealous because I can't do it. And then about a year or so later, the coroner's report came out. And part of the coroner's report, correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, was the fact the guy was backflying. I mean, okay, there are other factors involved. The guy was jumping a container that was far too big for the canopy that was in it. But a major factor is that if that guy hadn't been backflying underneath the tandem, and let's be honest, we all know that's the case. If you're backflying underneath a tandem and something occurs, you might cork out, you might have a premature deployment. No matter how well you think your rig is maintained, no matter how good a flyer you think you are, your rigger is still capable of human error. You're still capable of getting something wrong. If you're backflying under a tandem and something goes wrong, you're going to have 3 people as a fatality. And that's something that still bothers me today. I didn't have the balls to be able to put my hand up and say, I think that's wrong. I don't think we should be doing that. And it was only when the coroner's report came out that I actually had the cojones to actually say to my chief instructor, Gaz, I think we need to do something about this. I think we need to stop this, and we stopped it. And I hope that's something you can all take home to your DZs as well. You perhaps shouldn't be flying underneath tandems. But other occurrences of a lack of assertiveness in skydiving might be your colleague might have poor exits or canopy control. You might have safeguarding or GDPR concerns about a colleague. Your colleague might be going into your training record cards, picking out the phone number of the attractive students that are on the DZ. You might have concerns about your equipment. You know, you might be assessing students, seeing if they can lift their legs up. And it's a hard thing to say to a student, I'm sorry, I just don't think it's safe to take you. But you have to be. It's your responsibility to be assertive. Speak to that person first if you have a problem with them, because there's no point just going over their head, because that creates ill feeling. Why not have a chat with them first, then go speak to your chief instructor if you're still not happy, or find a common go-between. No rig has the right to be in the air if you've got a concern about it, and you always have to say no. If you have real concerns about something that you're doing or someone that you're working with, you have to have the balls to say no. So stress, number 10 on DuPont's Dirty Dozen list, is a subconscious response to the demands placed on us. Stress can be great. You know, it can inspire you to do good things, but excessive stress can be negative, and you've got to learn to manage stress, or it'll manage you. It can be influenced by lots of external factors that are nothing to do with skydiving, or it can be influenced by factors within skydiving, and often both. Countermeasures to this you always must be able to stop and look at the causes of stress, remove stress from your life. Halt check. I'm going to talk about stress in a second, and exercise. Exercise goes a long way to helping you cope with stress. Really great case study for this. I know I was supposed to focus on tandem incidents mainly, but this was a tandem incident because it was an aircraft that was full of tandems. And it was seconds away from disaster, where it nearly ran into the Duchess of Cornwall's helicopter. Now, in the AIB report, they interviewed the pilot of this aircraft, and one of the factors into why they nearly had a mid-air collision was because the pilot didn't call up the ATSU, didn't call up their local air traffic unit, speak to the air traffic unit who were trying to get hold of him and say, look, you've got a Royal helicopter in the airspace here. And the reason why he didn't is because he had lots of personal problems going on in his life, and he was focusing on those, so he wasn't doing his job effectively. Now, there's something called the stress bucket, if you like, and stress. Everybody has a bucket. Everybody has different sizes of buckets, and the more factors you put into the bucket will deem with how much you can cope with. And we start off with a very relaxed bucket when we've only got a certain level of things to deal with, and that goes to overflowing, where we really struggle with stress. And internal factors, work factors, contribute to this. You know, maybe doing lots of jumps, or a disagreement with a colleague, through to relationship issues that you may be having with friends and family at home, all contribute to you being stressed. And when your stress bucket starts overflowing, then you need to start putting holes in it, and the holes in it will be, you know, to remove those stressors. But one really good thing to check whether your stress bucket is too full is to do what they call a HALT test. Now, HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, love lost, or tired. And if you self-assess yourself, and if you have one or more of those, then you are in danger of having your bucket overflow. And you can use that as a self-assessment. You know, as you're walking to the DZ, look, you know, or as you're going through the day, am I hungry? You know, am I starting to shout at people when there's no reason? One way you can tell I'm stressed, one thing I do is I do manifest as well as tandem instructors when it's really quiet. You always tell when my bucket's starting to fill up because I start shouting at people. And that's angry, that's A. So that's when I start to think I've got to really sit this next lift down, because my HALT test is showing I'm in danger. So other stressors, external, might be relationship issues, might be a disagreement with a colleague. I've had this where we were talking about, it's always about money. I was talking about money with a colleague. We had a disagreement we even had a flat out disagreement on the flight line in front of students as to a correct way to get paid for, I think it was handycams or something insignificant. But in the end, you know, I realised that this was a stressor, and I backed down, and I just agreed to disagree with the colleague. Might be a personality clash that you have with a student. You know, sometimes we just don't click, or we have some kind of argument with a student. Maybe when you're doing an assessment, they don't agree with perhaps you asking them to lift their legs up for landing when you do an assessment, or perhaps you just can't keep up with the pace. So there's some obvious countermeasures to this. Risk assess yourself, discuss a resolution, get another instructor to take someone that perhaps you're not gelling with, and ultimately just take a lift off. Know when to say no. I'm going to take a lift off. So number 11 on DuPont's list is a lack of awareness, and this is a lack of alertness or vigilance, and it incurs just as much in the very experienced as it does with the lesser experience. And it's a failure to anticipate the consequences of something that we would normally consider as standard practice. So we need to always look at, what are the, if I'm going to do this, what's going to happen if I do that? One really good case study for this is the gainer exit. Now again, I see people smiling in the room here. There's great debate over whether a gainer exit is acceptable or whether it is not. And at STC on the 13th of September 2018 was an incident report where a guy did a perfect gainer exit. As he came out of the gainer exit, he didn't deploy the drogue. Did a systems check, checked the drogue, checked all his other handles, still didn't deploy the drogue, went to pull the main, meant to release the drogue, nothing happened, pull secondary, pull the reserve. Now, I don't know where you stand on gainer exits, but I personally think it's unnecessary. We're inducing risk where perhaps we don't need to induce risk. Another really good example of, I'm going to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. I'm not sure whether it's a gainer exit or just a weak exit, but either way, a weak exit, gainer exit is another example of a lack of awareness of something that could go wrong. So if you can't see it, he's thrown the drogue. He's thrown the drogue off his back, and the drogue is wrapped around the student's foot. So he's struggling with it, taking his time. Are you aware of this one, Mark? Is this incidentally? It's from 2018, 2019, I think. As we come round here in slow-mo, you'll see the drogue wrapped around the student's foot. I'm not sure if that's taken the student's shoes off or if she's just wearing...
No, the shoe came off.
The shoe came off. What's the drill for entanglement? Anybody? Yeah, it took a bit of time to clear it, didn't it? There we go, got away with it. We've seen plenty of examples where a reserve bridle line has not cleared the drogue bridle line. I think one really salient point here is that this was a YouTuber. You're probably familiar with YouTubers, as I am. This lady has 200,000 subscribers to a YouTube channel. 81,000, nearly 82,000 people have seen this incident, and it doesn't portray us in a particularly good light. She's really generous. I implore you to look at this particular incident up. She's really generous with the instructor, and she said, hey, it's one of those freak occurrences. I think we can all be pretty certain it's not a freak occurrence, it's the instructor messing up. Other examples of lack of awareness that we've seen here? The student's not wearing a hat, student's wearing shorts, and the instructor doesn't appear to be wearing a proper helmet. Other than that, it looks fine to me. But other examples of a lack of awareness there. So these are quite common in skydiving. What else can we find lack of awareness of the problems that we could create? Swooping tandem landings, throwing the drogue too quickly, unstable exits, not checking the student out properly. So we need to educate, we need to train instructors, and this is what this is all about. Perhaps we need to have chief instructors critiquing more videos. That's something that we certainly do. And let's face it, guys, stick to accepted procedures. If we stick to accepted procedures and something goes wrong, we can't be criticised for it. However, if we're doing something that's beyond the accepted procedure, it might be packing a drogue, it might be our exit, it might be our funky exit, and something does go wrong, then we're open to criticism. What could possibly go wrong? The final thing, just to square the circle then, is norms. And norms are unwritten rules or practices that are tolerated by everyone. Hey, it's just the way things are done around here. Norms can be positive and they can be negative. Negative detract from the established safety standard, and positive ones can lead to complacency. Countermeasures to norms, just because it's a norm, it doesn't make it right. Always refuse to take part in negative norms and always follow manufacturers' procedures. To go back to the incident that really inspired this particular this particular course. In the video, where luckily this lady didn't fall out of the harness, it was clear that the instructor also didn't do his handle checks. And okay, you might be thinking, well, that perhaps doesn't, it's not that significant. But if the guy's not doing his handle checks and he's missed this, what other checks isn't he doing? What other check has this guy clearly not done for this incident to occur? He's not done his checks in the aircraft to make sure the chest strap is on. And just to let you know that it all went okay, obviously we're not talking about a fatality. Now, handle checks at this particular DZ were something that was a norm. It was the norm that you didn't do your handle check. When I first came to this particular DZ and started working here, I spoke to one of the tandem instructors and I said, because I'd filmed him, I said, you're not doing your handle checks. And he goes, I've got 8,000 tandem jumps. I do 800 jumps a year. I know where the handles are. Well, actually, you don't. That's the whole point of doing a handle check. You don't. So although at this particular drop zone, there was a really positive attitude to safety, there were really strict safety procedures in place. There are also norms. Okay, a positive norm, but it had led to complacency and it also led to negative norms as well. Apologies, Mike, I'm not having a go at you. But what other norms might there be that we as skydivers might be not following? Flight line checking, not attaching proper importance to conducting a thorough flight line check. How many times have you seen that in your travels around other drop zones? Not doing your handle checks in freefall. This was how many incidents have there been written in STC where it says, and also the instructor did not do a proper handle check in freefall. Handle checks under canopy. How many people here can put their hand on their heart, put their hand up in the air and say, I always do a handle check under canopy? Okay, I'm not going to embarrass you by making you do that, but Mark talked about what we should be looking for a handle check under canopy. Leaving the laterals off. What about that Mexico fatality? That's really brought it home to me, the importance of attaching laterals and not doing our monthly drills with perhaps the importance that we should. So always refuse to take part in negative norms, always follow best practice, because then we don't have to put regulations in place. So in summary then, most errors are human and are therefore ultimately preventable. The Dirty Dozen is not an exhaustive list, but it can form a foundation for looking at the major errors and what we can do as instructors to prevent those errors from occurring. We should always try and learn from the mistakes of the past, so read your STC minutes, and we should also train people and promote an atmosphere where people can speak up. Consider regular human factors, CRM, crew resource management training, and get CPD where offered. Awesome, brilliant. So if you'd like any more information, there's some useful resources there. And if I am talking about you, just come and see me in the bar and I'll buy you a drink later on.